Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Today we have the illustrious Tyler Roberts on the show. Tyler, how's it going?
Going well, going well.
Cool. So today we're talking about typosquatting, what it is, how to defend against it, what the attacks look like. This is something, interestingly, when I saw it come across the news desk in my automation system now that I've geeked out on, it's like, of course, typosquatting. We haven't talked about that on the podcast in a while, I don't think, or maybe at all. So, yeah, typosquatting. We're going to talk about what typosquatting is, kind of what the variations are of typosquatting, because there's quite a bit. We'll talk about how it's typically used or abused by threat actors. We'll want to talk about kind of some defensive advice, right? Like how to mitigate this kind of thing or how to like get in front of it, be proactive. And that's what the episode is going to be about. So hope everybody enjoys this. Hope this is educational or informative for you. If so, let us know on social media or comments or stuff like that. So typosquatting. Typosquatting to me, and I'll let you share kind of like your version of this, Tyler, but typosquatting to me is just like lookalike domains or like domain hijacking, essentially registering a domain for a company that you're targeting, right? In this case, we're a threat actor, we're targeting a company. So we're going to register a domain that looks like their domain. So a good example would be instead of Secure IT 360, which is spelled SECURIT360.com, we would maybe register SECURLT360.com. That's because the I, the capital I looks like a lowercase l. And so those could be kind of confused when somebody's like quickly going around, glancing, clicking. They might not notice it. So there are various enumerations or permutations of this, rather. A lot of this is used for social engineering and phishing and supply chain attacks, all of which we're going to talk about. But Tyler, just give me your kind of quick thoughts on typosquatting and like your definition.
I feel like everybody should be aware of it because everybody's pretty much vulnerable to it. It's just one of those things that you can't really get rid of because somebody's just going to omit a letter here or there, or, omit or rather submit a letter in place of another. So everybody's domains that I've seen on externals have at least 5 to 10, domains that have been typosquatted that are lookalikes to theirs. Yep. So it presents a huge issue, and I feel like the more people are aware of it, the more that they'll be able to protect internal users with some security controls and external users with others.
Yeah, and that's something we check for in every external pen test. We do typosquatting checks to see if there are any domains registered that look like the organization's domain that we are pen testing, and we do a various number of checks with that. So, quick story. There was an article on socket.dev, which is some sort of like security, like dependency security type product. But anyways, they posted an article a few days ago about typosquatted Go packages that deliver malware loaders targeting Linux and Mac OS systems. So a lot of times when we talk about typosquatting, it's in the context of social engineering and phishing. Maybe we send an email or we stand up a login page that looks like another login page from a reputable brand, things like that. The lesser known side, or lesser, kind of talked about side maybe, is the software packages, or like GitHub repos and software packages and Python libraries, things like that are targeting developers and programmers and security researchers. And it's the same concepts, right? So like, all the concepts that we're going to talk about this in this episode are used kind of across the board. And there's a lot of different techniques for this, but I wanted to make sure we talked and made it known that like typosquatting isn't just domain names. It could be software packages. It could be any variety of things that, have a name, and it could have a lookalike domain. So software packages is another good one. This is a good article, and it talks about kind of how this threat actor created these typosquatted Go software packages. And like I said, it uses a lot of the same techniques we're going to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because a lot of the times when I think about typosquatting, it's just at the domain level. I don't really think about somebody going to somewhere like GitHub and cloning a repo, but replacing maybe the repo's owner's name with a zero instead of an O, and then having malicious packages in that repo that people are unaware about.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So that gets into kind of like why we care about this topic, right? Typo squatting exploits human behavior, human nature, right? People are busy. They don't have time to like highlight something and make sure it's the correct letter, or like, make sure. So they just click on it and they go. And it's very easy to just quickly glance at something like, oh yeah, that's an L, or that's an I, or whatever, and kind of go about your way. But this can be a pretty serious threat if executed well, right? And the implications are, stolen credentials. The implications are maybe, initial access into an Entra environment or Azure environment or even an on-prem environment, right? If I steal credentials and I'm somehow find a user, luckily that doesn't have an MFA, now all of a sudden I'm maybe compromising that account and moving to compromise that organization. And then supply chain attacks, are also a big threat because of this. I think defensive options are not necessarily the best, right? Some of the stuff we'll talk about, like just go out and register all the domains, is a great idea in theory. But at what point, right, do you stop and say, well, these permutations are not, realistically a threat? Because, Tyler, with AI, it's trivial now to come up with permutations.
Yep. Yeah, and I feel like protecting internal users is an easy task. If you have DNS filtering, DNS web content filtering, and things of that nature, to block those domains. But for external users or users that are going to visit your site, it's a little bit harder to protect them against those domains. And we'll talk about those defenses, but
yeah,
a little bit more complicated to implement those.
So let's talk about kind of like foundational typo squatting techniques here. Why don't you share some techniques here, and like how does somebody exactly go about registering a typo squatting domain, or what does that look like? What are kind of like the strategies or the techniques for coming up with lookalike domains?
Yeah, so I think one of the most common is omission. So removing a letter from somebody's domain name and registering that. You also have submission, so replacing maybe an S with a 5. Anything that's going to look the same to a user in, say, a URL that they're going to click, that you're going to send them, that they think is going to come from the hosting organization, and it's really coming from your typo squat. So just plenty of ways there.
Yep. Yeah, and this is all language, right? Like words. So like you said, putting a 0 for a O, or using alternative spellings of words. I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head for an alternative spelling. The first thing that came to my mind was like tomato. The phrase tomato,
Mm-hmm.
but that's literally spelled the same way.
Yeah, it is.
But like alternative spellings of names, is a good one as well. But intentional typos. So when somebody goes to type a website name, right? Like maybe there's a common typo that somebody will actually make typing in a URL or an address or something like that, or a name, have you ever been typing on your keyboard, right? And instead of you do ETH because your finger like moved a little bit too quick.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Stuff like that, where a user's like going to, actually type it in wrong, an intentional misspelling, are tricky ones.
Yeah, another thing is the top level domain. So instead of a .com, they can register your domain name with a .org. I see a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see .org, .net, and even different country codes. So like .ca for Canada, we'll see those a lot as well.
Yeah,
with various countries.
Yeah, definitely, and especially like technology sites with like IOs and things like that. There are so many TLDs, and you can actually combine them to make a word, right? So if you have some sort of word .ca or something, you can actually create words out of those, and kind of use that to trick users. Another technique that is commonly used is adding hyphens. Sometimes there are reasons to make URLs really long. So like if you're sending somebody an SMS fish, right? There's like preview parameters there, and only a certain amount of the URL shows. And you can actually make a long URL so that when somebody like clicks and holds it, the whole URL doesn't like show up in the browser kind of thing. So there are some techniques with that where you can extend the domain name. You can add hyphens. So you could like, instead of apple.com, it's like applepay.com, or things like that. Adding www, to the domain. So it's like www Facebook instead of www dot. It's just actually www with the word. And so subdomains, I don't know if we mentioned that one, but there are a lot of techniques with this, and all have to do with just changing words, adding letters, removing letters, kind of playing on the letters that look alike, like R and N and I and L, E and O, and those kinds of things, kind of like playing on those techniques a lot, which gets into like the permutation aspects of it, like swapping letters. But there's quite a bit of like variable technique here and things that could potentially go wrong with domain names or package names and things like that. That I think is it's interesting attack vector, but it's just definitely ripe for phishing and social engineering, stuff like that.
Yeah, and it works the same way that phishing's so successful. It's just keying off the user moving too fast or clicking something too fast. Because how often do you get an email that has a link in it, and you have to hover your mouse over, see the full link, click it, make sure what's in your browser is correct. It's a long process just to validate a link. So a lot of people aren't even going to do that, and they're just going to click it, Typosquatted domain, and then they're on a malicious website. So it happens really fast.
Yeah. And something else that I think is interesting too is the homoglyphs or the homographs, right? Where you use like Cyrillic or Greek characters or like letters. And because the way, computers work, those can sometimes look like just regular, ASCII letters. So sometimes those can be used as well in domain names that make it even more tricky, to spot unless you're like looking at it. Sometimes you have to like, what I'll do is I'll paste or I'll copy the URL and paste it into like Notepad or something where you can change the character representations and see what the actual letters are. But those can be tricky too. And those are homograph or homoglyph attacks.
Yeah, I see the O that you have listed in the show notes for the Latin alphabet. And like that's almost indistinguishable from a regular one. So those are really tricky.
Yeah, it's weird because like you'll see the URL and it'll be like that Cyrillic O or whatever it is. And it's like just a tiny bit smaller than the other letters, but you're like, maybe it's just my browser or like my eyes. But no. Yeah, those can be pretty tricky. So attacks. So we've got these typo-squatted domains. What are they used for, Tyler? Tell us a little bit about kind of like how you see these being abused or how they can be abused, and what people can look out for.
Yeah, so I think my number one, social engineering, through various methods. One of the most prominent being setting up fake login pages representative of an organization's true login page. That can go hand in hand with a cross-origin resource sharing vulnerability. Won't get into the meat and grits of that, but those two in play together, super, super dangerous. And then another one's phishing. So sending emails that look like the hosting organization that you're trying to attack is also another vector, just because people don't validate who's sending it fully sometimes. If they feel like, the first three letters of our domains are SECU and that's all they look at, that can slip by pretty easy as well.
Yep. Yeah, I can't imagine a much better credential harvesting technique than imitating a company's login page. Or, this is very successful Microsoft 365 login pages, but think bank websites, think, like document management system websites, anything. Like take, whatever your SSO apps are, which many times can be discovered externally, unauthenticated, right? Like we can figure out what SaaS applications your organization is using. We could literally imitate those login pages. And if users aren't kind of like clued in on identifying those things and realizing, oh, wait, I should have SSO and I should be automatically logged in or something. Why am I putting my credentials in? Those can be very easily used to deceive users. So those fake login pages are pretty deadly, and combined with the right URL, like right reputation and things like that, and actually getting the user to go to that website, those can be pretty devastating from a security standpoint.
Yeah, and sometimes those third-party apps are hard for users to validate as well because they go through so many redirects just to get to the landing page or login page they want to get to. Sometimes you're going through 3 or 4 different subdomains to get there.
Yep.
So, if we slip ours in the middle of that, it's going to look like a normal authentication flow to them.
Yep. And phishing was a big one as well, and we wanted to touch on that. So how are threat actors using typosquatting for phishing, and what do those kind of attacks look like?
Yeah, it's kind of just same in line. So just omitting characters from a domain that they've registered to send mail from, and then sending mail from that lookalike domain with malicious payloads like Word documents, or even malicious links out to pages like login pages that you can credential farm from.
Yeah, it's like, hey, if you're a law firm, it's like, hey, I've got this evidence you need to download. Go to this file sharing site, and it looks like ShareFile. And they go and they, click to log in, or they click to download a file, right? And unbeknownst to them, it looks like it's, sharefile.com or, companyname.sharefile, but it's actually a typosquatted domain. And they download a file and they open it on their machine, and now there's, malware running on the machine, kind of thing. And, as long as, that domain has good reputation, has been blacklisted, it's not newly registered, because a lot of phishing or email security products will pick up on a lot of those things. There are a number of indicators for like suspicious pages, but if you're able to get something, if a threat actor is able to get it to kind of look very believable, get the reputation up and the trust up of that domain, it can be very easy to trick users into downloading stuff, clicking stuff, logging in, etc.
Yeah, and I'll say, we kind of went through the process of procuring domains, registering, and it is really not that hard to stand up a domain that looks legitimate, to get a reputation on it that, isn't indicative of what the domain's actually doing. Because GoDaddy will actually, host content for you on some of those domains. So getting reputation is not a super huge ask.
Yeah, with the AI products now, you could just like tell it to create you a website based on, whatever variables or description you give it, like anything from healthcare to manufacturing to financial services. Like you just tell ChatGPT, give it a prompt, right, and tune it a little bit, and it'll just generate you this awesome, website and give you the code for it, and you just spin it up online. GoDaddy, you mentioned GoDaddy. They have like AI tools where it's like, I'm a healthcare company, and like they'll spit out a template. So it's never been more easy to like just stand up a website or even to clone websites. There's a lot of tools that you can just point it to a website and it'll clone the whole thing or clone a specific page. It's getting even easier now to clone websites and kind of masquerade that. And kind of the only thing kind of preventing it is users being aware of it, and you kind of being proactive and kind of identifying those things early on, like when the domains are registered or when you see new typo-squatted domains targeting your organization. There's really the defensive controls for this are not necessarily as good as some other areas of security.
Yeah, I think this is one of those that kind of gets brushed more under the rug because it's not as pertinent as other attacks. It's not as big of a vector in terms of how much it's abused, but that doesn't mean it's not as big of an issue as some of these other things.
Yep. So what about defensive advice, right? So we talk about kind of the attacks. I think everybody who's listening probably has a good understanding of typosquatting, what it is and how it can be abused. But what about defensive advice?
Yeah, so monitoring is a huge one. So being able to be alerted when new typo-squatted domains are spun up and be aware of those so that they can be added to internal DNS blacklists or, submit takedowns for those as soon as they come up. Having monitoring, like everything else in security, is, I'd say, one of the key parts.
Yeah, and something I would do is automate this process. Like there's no reason why you can't automate this completely. You could use tools like DNS Twist. There are a number of DNS like enumeration tools that look for registered domains. They look for newly registered like typosquatting domains, lookalike domains, things like that. You could create like an automation process that runs every day and it like runs the report and it sends you the results like, hey, there's a new Typosquatted domain today. And you could even automate potentially, the takedown notice for those registrars, right? Like you could have ChatGPT write you up a notice and then send it into your email system and automatically send it, right? Like you could, I can see people being able to like fully automate this process of like, finding a Typosquatted domain, sending a DMCA takedown or some sort of trademark notice or something like that to the registrar and be like, hey, you got to take this down. Or just automate the process of registering those domains. Just like have ChatGPT generate a whole list of domains that look like yours that are like believable, right? Because ChatGPT could create like billions, but like generate a list, right, of the most likely ones that are most likely to trick users, and then just go register them all. Like just go spend a couple grand, whatever it costs to go register like 100 domains, right?
Yeah.
Not the most ideal scenario, like, because you got to remember to renew those. And maybe you want to make sure like they're not parked and like some weird, stuff is getting on the parked sites and stuff like that. But I mean, for the amount of money that it would cost to register a whole bunch of lookalike domains versus the risks of it, I see it as like a decent trade-off,
Yeah, I was laughing earlier because your automation spill. I feel like with all the automation you've done with the podcast and everything is bleeding over, and you're looking for areas everywhere.
Yeah. Inside joke for those listening in, I have done a deep dive into Zapier, automating like kind of the post-production stuff with our content, and my content like personally. And I'm like full in head over heels in love with Zapier and like automation products like that. I've got integrations from like Reddit to pull in to Notion to ChatGPT to back to Notion to like templating like an episode outline to like feeding it all to all these systems, and it's crazy. But with AI, the various different AI platforms and like their specialties with it, with automation systems and like especially no code with Zapier and Make and things like that. It can be very powerful to automate a lot of your work and workflow. And this is just one of those things that I think you can automate quite a bit of, like at least the monitoring of it, run DNS twist on a daily basis, get a report kind of thing, at least at like bare minimum. So stuff like that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to haveibeen.squatted.com. That is what we use on our externals. They're super great. I don't know how many permutations they have that they look for per domain. I know typically we run through anywhere from 50 to 500,000, depending on the domain, and it'll spit you out a list and have a severity rating based off how close the Typosquat is to your actual domain name.
Yep.
And they take it a step further. They'll tell you the IP of the server. They'll send you a screenshot of what the homepage of that server looks like, and they'll tell you what type of server it is. So you get a bunch of information back from them, even just on the free tier. I know they just launched a pro tier. I'm excited to try that out, but I think that one's stellar as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. There's a lot of cool tools like that. I was debating writing one in PowerShell, like specifically for this use case, like specifically to monitor domains and send, draft up a DMCA takedown notice to send it to a registrar. Maybe I'll still do something like that and create like an automation for it and share it. But I think that would be kind of neat. But you can, if there are legitimate Typosquatted domains that are posing as your firm, as your brand, if you have, trademarks, especially, you have some ground to stand on to send takedown notices or copyright notices and things like that. So there are resources that you can do to get those removed or taken down. We mentioned being proactive. Let's just go out and register a whole bunch of domains. Like just spend a few grand, register a bunch of domains, make sure that they renew, right? Make sure they're not parked. The content that's parked on them is anything kind of weird. Maybe just redirect them to your main site. But also have a plan to address when typosquatting happens, right? If you find out from a pen test or from an email, from a phish, or for some other like, oh, there's this website that looks like ours, what's going on? Think about a process and have some sort of documented process for, the action that you're going to take so that ahead of time, like, here's exactly what we're going to do when we see these things. and then everybody knows the plan. Everybody can follow the plan, and plans are good.
Yeah, and this is why earlier I was saying that protecting external users is a lot more difficult, because going out and finding typo squatted domains or even being proactive and buying them, it's expensive. It's a little bit tedious. Even sending the DMCA notices, it's not an instant thing. So this process takes a little bit of time.
Yep.
So it's not as easy for your internal users. It's as easy as adding domains to a DNS blacklist for those typo squats. That's a lot simpler than it is for external users. So a little bit of nuance when you're trying to protect everyone on the internet instead of just internal people.
Yeah. And I know you wanted to talk about like DMARC and SPF and that kind of stuff. So how does that play into this and kind of mitigating those email-based typo squatting attacks?
Yeah, so DMARC, DKIM, SPF, that's kind of your 3-tiered security. SPF is your sender policy framework. So anybody that you want to be able to send in emails on your behalf is specified in your SPF record. So for example, most organizations have protection.outlook.com listed in there, and that allows Outlook to send emails on your behalf. Anybody else, third-party vendors that need to send emails on your behalf, you specify in there as well. And then your DMARC policy checks against sent emails. And based off the policy you have set in DMARC, whether it's none, quarantine, or reject, any emails that come in to external users are checked against that SPF list. And if that email does not match what's in your SPF record, your DMARC policy applies. So if you have a quarantine, if somebody set up a typo squatted domain, they send emails from it, that's not going to be in your SPF record. So the receiving user, that email is going to go to their spam folder. So you have additional protections, not only internally, but for everyone externally that's receiving mail from you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, super good. And I think that's maybe a little less commonly talked about as a defensive mechanism, right? I think DMARC, SPF, and DKIM just in general don't get the airtime that they deserve, because we see this all the time. And we evaluate on external pen tests and like, hey, this is the benefit you get from these things. And once clients and people kind of see like the value of it and kind of demystify it a little bit for them, they're kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, and as a note, if your policy is set to none on your DMARC record, nothing happens to spoofed emails ever, typo squatted emails ever. They're going to be delivered to that end user because your policy is set to not do anything. Yep. So if you're on a none policy right now, evaluate your email ecosystem and then try and push that to a quarantine or reject as soon as you can, just to actually get that security benefit.
Yep. And of course, some email security products will be able to detect some of these typo squatted domains and lookalike domains. That's becoming to be more common now with these email security platforms. So there are some mitigations and kind of defenses there. But also important, I think goes without saying, is just awareness, security awareness for users, right? Incorporating, what typo squatting is, what to look for, how to identify it, how to report it to IT or security. Just doing that on a regular basis with your users, making sure they kind of understand, what should happen if they see a typo squatted domain or they get an email that looks similar, but they can tell that it's different, it's spelled differently. So just ensuring, when they type things, they have the right address. Thinking before you click. If you're not sure, ask. Kind of the tried and true foundational security awareness stuff. But incorporating this on a regular basis is a good idea because these are threats that users directly see, right? These are specifically crafted to target users who don't know any better. So we want to make sure we just get them up to speed and they're aware of these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's kind of like the true to all social engineering attacks is users are your weakest link. So they're probably going to be exploited the most and the most successfully out of those. Yep. So make sure your end users are aware about more than just phishing because of how much security is changing. I think smishing is becoming very prominent too, as well as, typo squatting to help bolster those types of attacks. So,
yep. Yeah, I sent something out to my email list this week. And it was like a picture of mishing, and it was like this funny thing. It's like all these phishing and vishing and smishing and mishing, and tishing and all these ishings. You know, it's just kind of funny that like we just keep putting ishing on the ends of things.
Well, I think we're at like 10 or 12 ishings now. Like there's just so many.
Yeah, we need like so for those who are familiar with like the LOL bins projects, or things like that, we need like an LOL bins project for ishing phrases. I don't know if somebody's created that or not, but
If they haven't, I might.
yeah, so that's our episode. Any last minute thoughts or comments about Typosquatting, things we missed?
No, I think we got it.
Cool. So yeah, we talked about Typosquatting. We talked about how like you can misspell things intentionally, change the wording, kind of permutate the spelling of things, and kind of trick users. And it's very successful. It's a very what's the word for it? I'm drawing a blank. It's a very effective type of attack, like social engineering attack against users, because it just, like you said, plays on the users, desire to get their work done and like quickly move on to things and not pay attention to things as they're super busy. So yeah, that's our episode. Hope you guys got value from that. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like these kinds of episodes, let us know. We release new episodes every Friday, and you can check us out at secureIT360.com. And for all of our like OffSec content, podcasts, blogs, and white papers and all that stuff, you can check us out at offsec.blog. And yeah, everybody have a great day. Talk to you next time.